Hello, sweet friends. It's Sarah at Crochet.With.Coffee, and thank you so much for joining me for this A+ cardigan tutorial. Now, this cardigan is made up of all single crochets for the main pieces. So it's going to be very easy construction. You're just going to do some color changes here and there to add stripes. They're all full rows, so you're not changing colors mid-rows. And there are some pieces that are solid. There are some pieces that change colors more frequently, but we're going to go over that in just a moment. First off, I want to talk about sizing. Now, this tutorial is for a medium to large size. Now, if you're interested in making a different size, I have resources linked in the description for the Craft Yarn Council. They have body standard measurements listed there, and I think they have sizes extra small to 5X. So you can check out those sizes there. And I also have my gauge listed in the description for what I did with this one. So you have all those resources in the description for you. If you are struggling with anything and you have questions, please feel free to reach out. I will do my best to help you with anything that you have questions on. Once our primary section is done, we will be going back and doing some details on these pieces to give them a little bit more dimension and some more fun designs. So I do want to share with you in the description, I have a PDF listed for you. Now yours will be colored, and I will put the colored one up on the screen in a moment, but I just want to go over this with you really quick. So this PDF has a picture of each of the panels that you make. So we have the back panel, a front panel, another front panel, a sleeve panel, and another sleeve panel. Now over here on the left-hand side, I have the amount of rows that you're going to be doing in each color. And then I also have your stitch count for your width of your piece. So you're just going to be doing one extra chain for all of this. Like this back piece here is 88 single crochets wide. You would start with a chain of 89. This one is 35 single crochets wide, and you would just start with 36 chains. So that is that way throughout all of these pieces. And then you have your row count this direction. But you have this as a reference. And again, I will put the picture up on the screen so you can screenshot it or take a picture of it. And then you also have the PDF that you can print off in the description or reference that. Now, the front panel that we are going to make as a pencil, we are going to be adding this extra length down here for the end of the pencil, and that is going to hang lower on the cardigan. So this is a little bit longer here, so it's an extended portion. That is something we are going to be doing together because I want to give you a step-by-step on how to do that. But all of your rectangle pieces, you can get all your basic instruction here. But I just want to give a brief summary of this. So you see how it says 15 plus 1 is this top section. That just means that this top section is going to be 16 rows. That includes your blue stripe. So that plus 1 is your blue stripe. So each section counts as 8 rows. And that's making it pretty complicated to just look at it that way. But I just want you to know you're going to do 15 rows of white, 1 row of blue, 7 rows of white, 1 row of blue, 7 rows of white, 1 row of blue. You continue doing that all the way down at the bottom. And then you are going to add your 4 extra rows on the bottom. Now, with each of these, I will share with you where you can either add length or shorten length for each piece if you are changing sizes and you don't want to make it either as long or as short as this and you want to adjust it. So for this one, you can add, if you want to make it longer than this piece, which I have all the lengths listed in the description along with the gauge and the yardage, you can see that in the description. But if you want to make it longer or shorter, you can take out either a full row if you want to make it a whole lot shorter, or you can take off this bottom portion or add length in this bottom portion. You can add another stripe if you'd like. That's this is the area that would be good to add length or shorten length. So this right here, just as an example. And then this is the ruler. This one is all one color, so you can lengthen or shorten this at any point. In the pencil, you can lengthen or shorten anywhere in this yellow portion. The sleeve, anywhere in this midsection is a good place to add or subtract rows. Same over here. And you could also add length to the bottom. This one is really whatever you would prefer. Adding to the length of the bottom also works. So let's get into actually how we are going to stitch this together. We are going to be using a 5.5 millimeter hook. And again, if you don't want to use this size, you want to use something larger or smaller, you can feel free to do that, especially if it helps you with your gauge. Another thing I found helpful while working with single crochets and working in rows are some stitch markers. So that way you can track the ends, because sometimes you can skip an end stitch. These make it really helpful. If you want to use more stitch markers and mark every 10 rows or something like, or I'm sorry, every 10 stitches or something like that to make sure that you're staying on track, that's also helpful, but not necessary. Those stitch markers are just a little helpful extra tool. You will need a tapestry needle for sewing in your ends to make sure that your ends are nice and secure and your piece does not come unraveled. Scissors and a tape measure is very helpful to make sure that you're on track with your sizing, and if you are measuring yourself to make this cardigan fit you. All right, so let me get started on how we're going to stitch up these pieces. They are basic instructions. You'll use them for every single piece. It just depends on the sizing and how many chains you do. So I'm going to show you a little swatch on how we're going to do that. So we are going to start with a chain, and going off of the chart that I shared with you, I am going to start with a small swatch just so I can show you the color changes, because this is really self-explanatory. So just as an example, this piece right here is going to start with 88 single crochets, and it's going to be 88 single crochets through the entire piece, so 88 across, and then you're going to do 100 rows down. So for this piece, I'm going to chain 89. So you just want one extra chain for whatever size you do. And again, you do whatever size works for you, and you can go off of those body standard measurements if that is helpful. So 89 chains is what you would start with for this back panel for this medium to large size. And again, like I mentioned, I am only going to do a swatch, so I'm going to do a smaller piece. If you need any help on how to do the basic stitches, chaining, single crochets, double crochets, anything like that, I do have that playlist listed in the description just in case you need to reference that as a beginner. So we are, imagine I have my 89 chains here. I am going to skip my first chain, so not the one on my hook. I'm going to skip the next one right there and work into the next one after that. So that would end up giving me that 88 single crochets because I'm skipping that first chain. So just work all the way across your project. If you are going to use your stitch markers, just put your stitch marker in the first stitch that you made so you don't miss it on the way back. And then we are just going to do our single crochets and our chains all the way across. One thing that I forgot to mention is when you are doing your chains, you want to make sure you keep them loose, because some of the chains that we are making are going to be seams. So like this, you would start with your 54 chains. You want to make sure that you keep them loose because this is the top of your arm, and you want to make sure that can stretch and you're not restricted on the top of where your arm is. So that's one of the examples why you want to keep your chains on the looser side. So work all the way across your row. Once you get to your last chain, finish that off, and then you're going to chain 1 for your turning chain, turn your work, and you're going to work into that first stitch. Your chain does not count as a stitch. All right, and then you'd work all the way across. I'm going to put that little stitch marker in that first stitch here. And then you're just going to go all the way back, just going to work all the way across this piece again. All right, so I'm at my last stitch here. I'm just going to make sure I work in that one that I had my stitch marker in. Okay, and now I'm going to show you how to change your work. So if you were doing this, as an example, this first section here on your back piece, that right there is going to be 15 rows of white, and then you have 1 row of blue, and you have 7 rows of white, 1 row of blue, 7 rows of white, 1 row of blue, and you just follow the example of that. So really, I mean, I have it listed this way so it's upright, but you are going to be working from this end down on all the pieces. So you're going to be starting at the top and working down. So each piece is worked from the top down. If I were doing that piece and it was the proper size, I would be doing 15 rows, and then I would be changing my yarn color. So that's what I'm going to do now. When you're ready to change your yarn color, you're going to work to the end of your row, chain 1, cut your yarn long enough so that you can weave in your ends, so about 5 or 6 inches. Pull that through and tighten. If you have a different way that you like to change your colors, feel free to do that. And then you are going to attach your yarn in this section. So you can either tie on your yarn, you can slip stitch your yarn onto there, but I'm going to show you how to do a standing single crochet. So you're just going to do a slip knot on your hook. So you've got your slip knot on your hook. You're going to go into the space that you're attaching the yarn. So my first stitch here of the row, and I'm going to pull my yarn through that space and then pull it through those 2 loops on my hook. And again, if you want to attach your yarn a different way, go for it. Whatever works for you is perfect. All right, so then you're just going to work your row all the way across. All right, working in my last stitch of this row, and then you are going to chain 1 and cut your yarn here. That is your 1 row of blue. So then you would turn your work, and then you would attach your white the same way and work back and forth however many rows you need to, that's on your chart. And that is how you color change. So like I said, for this piece, this is the most complicated as far as color changes go because it's so frequent. So I tried to list it in a way that was easy to understand, but you have your 15 white plus 1 blue. And then you have your 7 white plus 1 blue. And then 7 white plus 1 blue. And you just keep going down here. Like I said, you can print this off and you can like highlight each one that you do. At the end, I have 4 rows here, but like I said, if you need to extend or shorten, you can add or subtract to your rows here. You would just keep up with the same pattern if you are going to go longer. So that is what the back panel is. Let's look at our ruler section. Now this one is the most simple piece. It is just all one color, and you are going to be starting with 36 chains, and you're going to do 35 single crochets all the way across, all the way down for 100 rows. So like I said, you're chaining 1 more than your stitch count across here. So 35 single crochets is what you want. So you would chain 36. You're using that extra chain as a turning chain. So go ahead and do this one, which is 100 rows of 35 single crochets across. So now that you have your basic color changing for your stripes and your different color changing rows, you are going to weave in your ends. So I'm going to show you how to do that if you're not familiar with how to do that. You're going to take your tapestry needle and feed your yarn through that. And you're going to pass this thread through your stitches about 3 times. That seems to hold really well for me. So you're just going to go right through the middle of those stitches, just like that. You're just weaving in these ends so they don't come unraveled. So go ahead and go 3 times. That's 1. This is a second time, just making sure you're not pulling tight when you hit the end. And then 1 more time. And then I'm going to cut my yarn. You want to make sure you're weaving in your ends before you cut your yarn, or your project can come unraveled. So then you can cut that end right next to your project. Just make sure you don't cut your project. So that is how you would change colors and weave in your ends. And go ahead and keep following the instructions for your back panel piece of paper. We will add the details later on, but we are just making our panels right now. We'll go back for details later. Before we start our next project, I just want to clarify on here, on the piece of paper that I'm using as an example, I didn't realize that I had the wrong stitch count when I first started making the pencil, so I did have to adjust that later on. All of the PDFs that you have and the colored pictures that I put up on the screen are all the correct numbers. So please just ignore the 65 rows that I mentioned for the yellow in this section. It is 74 and what's on your PDF and what's on the colored pictures. So I just wanted to clarify that really quick. We are going to be working on our pencil. So our pencil is going to be the same width as the ruler was. So it's going to be 35 stitches, 35 single crochets across, which means you would start with 36 chains, and then you'd skip that first chain and work your 35 single crochets. Now for this one, remember we are working top down on all of them. This one, you are going to start with your pink color, and pink is going to be your 22 rows, just like it says over here on the chart. 22 rows, you're going to color change and work 13 rows of your gray. Then you will color change and work rows of your yellow color. Now again, if you want to change size, you would just shorten or lengthen your amount of rows in this yellow section. That is it for this piece. Once you have that complete, put it to the side. We will do the end of the pencil at a later time when we start doing the detail work on all of these pieces. So once you have gotten your 100 rows total here, you are all done with your pencil piece until we're ready to add that end. Now for your marker, it is going to be 53 single crochets wide, which means you're going to start with your chains and then you're going to skip the first chain and work your 53 single crochets all the way across, back and forth. Now when your color changes happen, your color changes are going to be the same for your marker and your crayon. So it's the same piece, you just do different colors. Now this one, you're going to work 10 rows of white. You're going to change your color, do 8 rows of green or whatever color you choose. Then you would change your color and do 30 rows of white, and then change your color, do 8 rows of your color, and then change color again and do 2 rows of your other color. Now if you're going to add length to this, you can add length either in this section here or in the bottom section. If you're going to take away length, just remove it from here. And that is the same exact thing for your marker piece and your crayon piece. And you have those dimensions there. The total rows that you're going to be making are 58 total rows with all those color changes. So now that we are done making each individual piece with our chart, and again, if you have any questions, please let me know. So now we are going to start adding the details to these pieces. So like this one here, we have a slip stitch design that is going through this project. I'm going to show you how to do this little wave on the marker piece because it's easier to see than it would have been on the black. I just want to show you what we're going to do because you know that how crayons have that little design. And you can also see my swirl did not land exactly the same place on the top and the bottom, even though I started off in the same location. For this one, I counted the same. I don't know how I got off. I missed a stitch somewhere, but just remember, it's okay to be imperfect. So that is what we're going to be doing. These little swirls here and these little waves, we're going to be adding that to the marker as well. So let me show you how to do that, and I'll show you how we are going to do our additions on each piece. You can see I have my little like 4 sections with my 8 rows, kind of breaks off into sections there. I'm going to start on that middle space there. So I'm going to put a slip stitch onto my hook. This is going to be worked with the working yarn is going to be underneath your project and your hook is going to be on top of your project. So let me show you kind of how we are doing that. So I have my left hand underneath my project, my right hand and my hook on top. And if you have a pencil grip, this is going to be easier for you than it is a knife grip. With our slip knot on our hook, we're going to go into that first stitch that we can see there. And again, it does not need to be perfect. This is just to add a little bit of extra fun. So we're going to go into that first stitch there in our center row. And then you can see the hook coming out from the back side. What we are going to do is take our yarn that we have with our left hand and we're just going to pull that through to the top of the fabric. So you've got those 2 loops on your hook. Now you're going to pull through one. It's just a slip stitch. Okay, and then we are going to go diagonally a few rows. So what I did for this one was I went up 3 rows, I went across 3 stitches, down 3 rows, or no, I'm sorry, I went down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and across 3, so that our lines here ended up, you know, like 1 row down, 1 row up, something like that. And again, it's not perfect and that's okay. We're just trying to get that basic swirl in there. So I'm going to go up a stitch, you know, up a row and over a stitch. Same thing going through the fabric. I'm going to pull up a loop from my yarn underneath, pull it through to the top and through the stitch on your hook. You want to keep these loose because you don't want to pucker your fabric and your stripes here. So I went up, you see how it's kind of diagonal here. I'm going to go up the next row and over, and you're really kind of just eyeballing where you're going with this. So I got my slip stitch there, and then I'm going to go over. So on the same row that I worked here, I'm just going to do 3 stitches and see, pull that through, 1, go underneath, grab your yarn, pull that through, and pull it through the loop on your hook, and 1 more. Okay, now I'm going to go down this way again. So we're going to do 5 down to this this section right here. So diagonal again, we're going to go down and over a tiny bit. And like I said, it's okay if it's not perfect. And this one is really easy to tear out if you're not liking the way that the lines are lining up. And if you want to completely skip this step, you can also do that. You will get the same idea. It's perfectly fine if you don't want to add these details. Right. And then I'm going to go over 3 on the same row. Okay, so you're just making that little curve. So you go over 3, you go up 5, over 3, down 5, over 3, up 5, and just keep doing that for your swirl. If you find that you need to do less or more, you do you. Whatever works best for you is great. So I'm going to keep going with this, and then I'm going to do my bottom stripe as well. And we'll meet back up for our next piece. But you're going to do this on the crayon and the marker. And then when you get to the end here, I got my last stitch. I'm just going to work around the back side and just grab that and do a little chain and tighten that up. If I can find my scissors. Cut a tail so you can weave that in and tighten that up, and you are done with your little curvy swirl thing. So then just do that the same way down here, and again, if it's off a little bit, not a big deal. It's okay. Nobody's ever going to notice. Then just duplicate that on the bottom, and it does not need to be perfectly symmetric. So don't worry if it's a tiny bit off. It's a little bit hard to count diagonal those stitches. So it's okay if it's a tiny bit off. Do not worry. Because this is going to be, over here is going to be the seam underneath your arm. So you will probably never even really see it. Finish up the bottom of this marker piece. Do both pieces for your crayon. And then I will be back when we start on our next piece. Now we are going to be adding the lines to our ruler. So I just wanted to give a little visual here of what we're gonna try to accomplish. So what I want for this piece, and you can adjust it whatever you would like, but I'm going to make my 1-inch marks go all the way to the center of this project. And I folded this in half like this, and then I marked where my half mark was, and then I folded that in half, and then marked that, and then folded that in half, and marked that one. So that's how I found my 1-inch line marks that I'm going to have here. You can do whatever you'd like. You can make them more frequent, but what I want to add here is I want to do 1-inch marks. I want to do 1/2-inch marks that will line up in between here, and then I want to do quarters. So, I may end up making the 1/2-inch start here, and yeah, let's do that. So I'm going to have my 1/2-inch that's going to be between here. I'm going to have that end at the center point. So I'm going to have the full inch just go about 3/4 of the way. I'm going to change that up. So this may not be on the right line here, the right row, but I'm just doing that so I go about the same distance, about 3/4. So about right there. So I know about where I'm going to stop. So that will be my inch mark. And then when I fold this in half again, like after I put my lines in, I'm going to fold this in half again and mark this section right there. And that will be where my 1/2 inch line is going to be. And I'm going to go halfway to through the ruler panel here. I'm going to do that on this part, this part, this part, and this part, and then I'll go back and do the quarters the same way, which the quarters will only end up going 1/4 of the way, so it all ends up working out that way. So let's get started on here. I'm going to start from this side just so I can work from the edge and work over, and I am going to do black for this one. So we're going to do the same thing with our slip knot, and starting with the working yarn behind and your other hand behind, and then just going in that first section there. I'm going to grab my yarn and pull it through and do my little slip stitch. Okay, and get this out of the way. And then you're just going to slip stitch down, right down that seam there, all the way to your stitch marker so you know where to stop. Now I'm not going to be adding numbers just because I don't want the numbers to be oversized and take over the whole cardigan, but if you want to add numbers and you want to try to figure out how to do your stitches to create those numbers, you can feel free to do that. Or if you can find buttons that are numbers, you could add those to it. That would be really fun too. But you're just going to go all the way down to your stitch marker. All right, I finished. I got down to my stitch marker, and I'm just going to cut the yarn from the back side, and then you can pull that little thread up there and do a chain and finish that off. And then you can tie in when you sew in your ends, you can just follow that seam. Just do the same thing back and forth with your tapestry needle, just follow that line there. So go ahead and do the rest of these 1-inch lines, and then we'll come back to mark our 1/2 inch lines. We're all set with the 1-inch lines. Now I'm going to mark for the next one. So I'm going to just fold this in half and just mark wherever that half lands. And it's okay if it's not perfect. If you really want to make sure that every single row is exact, you can count your rows and mark each line for each row. You can adjust the type of mark that you want to do. If you want to do just full inch and 1/2 inch and you want to just avoid the quarter, you can do that too. So now I have all my halves marked, and I'm going to mark halfway for this, halfway to the ruler. So just do that about halfway, and just do that for all of your sections, and then do the same thing that you did and do your slip stitches to that point, same way that we did our 1-inch section. All right, we're all done with our half lines. Now you're going to do the same thing and just fold these sections in half again and mark those just like we did the last few. Do that all the way up and then mark where you want your line to end. So I'm going to do halfway, half of what the other 1/2 inch line was. So I'm just going to mark right there, And do that for all of your sections in between each section, and do your lines, and we'll be back to check in. And make sure you tie in all of your ends, sew them in the back there, and then we'll do a check-in to see how this piece is looking. All right, the ruler is all done. I have my inch marks, my half-inch marks, and my quarter marks, and that is how that's looking. I have not done my ends yet, but you can go ahead and weave in your ends for these pieces, weaving them back and forth. Now for our back panel, our little piece of paper that we have here, or I guess our big piece of paper, what we are going to be doing is adding, now this one, you can decide what side you like, what one you think is better as far as the lines that you want to be shown. If you like this side or if you like this side better. I think I'm going to go with this side for mine. They're a little bit more bold. And you know, on a piece of paper, how they have the little paper holes here? I'm going to add little crocheted circles. So we're going to crochet those up, and then we can sew them on, and then we will know where we want the vertical red line. So let's do our circles, but we're going to start with a magic ring. I do have a tutorial if you would like some more information on that, but we are going to start with our magic ring, and if you don't like to do magic loop, you can chain 3 or 4 for your center. The tutorial I have in the description if you want more details on how to do a magic ring to start your center. So I have 1 chain here. I'm going to chain, so a total of 3 chains, and then you're going to double crochet into this ring. You're going to do 11 double crochets. You want 12 total. That first chain 3 is going to count as a double, so you're going to do 11 more double crochets into this ring. All right, let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 double crochets in our chain 3. So then we're going to close up this ring here. And if you did a chain ring, you don't need to do this part. And then you're just going to slip stitch into the top of that chain 3. Okay, and then chain 1, and you're going to work 2 singles into that same stitch that you just slip stitched into. If you want to use a stitch marker to mark your first stitch, since this is black yarn, it's a little bit harder to see. So I like to pop in a stitch marker. You're going to do 2 singles in each stitch all the way around, and then I'll meet back up with you when we are at the beginning. All right, we have 24 single crochets all the way around, and I'm going to slip stitch into that first single that we made and chain 1, and you're going to cut your yarn, but remember to leave a good sized tail because you're going to be using this black yarn to attach your circle to your panel. All right, so make 3 of these, and then we will attach them to our piece of paper panel. Now I have this laid out so hopefully you can see most of the piece of paper. I'm going to lay these out and see about where I want them so that they're evenly spaced. I think I like that. So I'll probably just put a stitch marker wherever they land so I can keep track of where that is while I stitch them on. I'll show you how I'm going to do that. And with my yarn needle, I'm just going to take that long tail And you can also weave in your tail from the center. So I'm just going to take the yarn and go down and up just around a stitch. If you want to go all the way down through the cardigan and then back up, you can. I just find this to be a little bit faster. Go down and up and just make sure you're catching underneath. And just go all the way around. And if you want to hide that tail, I can just stick it under there. And go all the way around and do that for all of your pieces, and we'll be back and we'll add our red stripe. All right, the little holes on the paper are sewn on. This is the back. You can barely see it because I just did the little weaving in there, just caught some of the white yarn. Now we need to do the little red stripe. Now you could do this in pink like you used for the eraser, but I'm just going to use red because I think that would be fun. And we're going to do the same thing. What I'm going to do is take a stitch marker just so I can look at it real quick and just line it up right here. I think I want to have it be the same distance from this side to this side. So I think about there is where I want it to line up. So what I'm going to do is just pick a stitch here and then just go all the way down. I'm going to check it every once in a while to make sure that it's still lined up and that it hasn't gotten any curves. And if it does, I'm just going to rip it out. But go ahead and attach your yarn like you have with all the other straight lines that you've done, and just go vertically all the way down. So the way that you're going to do this, you have it attached. Now we're going to be doing our slip stitches all the way up, but what you're going to do is you're going to skip a row so that you can make sure that your line stays straight. So you can look at your stitches and you can see when you are going from, like as an example here, hopefully you can see your one space that you have here is a little bit off on the next row, a little bit off on the next row, and it just keeps going back and forth. Now, if you want to try and follow that all the way up, feel free to do that. But what we're going to do with this one is we are going to skip a row. So you're going to make sure your stitches are very loose because your yarn is going to be going over more space than it typically would. But you're going to go in not this row, but the next row up. And then it should be easier for you to stay in line with your stitches. So not this one, but the one above. So really just work it out whatever way is easiest for you to stay in line. And then you're just gonna keep going like that. And that should give you a nice and straight line all the way up your project. So go ahead and complete that, and we will meet back up just to take a look, and we'll start on our next piece. This is looking so cool. All right, so here is the piece of paper. Little holes in the paper. You've got your red line, your blue lines, and this one is all complete. Now let's start on our pencil. Now before we can do any of our decorative lines on this one, we have to build the end. So the end of the pencil, we are going to have to taper down. Now we're going to attach our next color for the wood of the pencil, and we're going to attach to the right hand side. So attach in the farthest stitch. All right. And then just single crochet all the way across. And we finished our row, and I chained one and turned. And now we're going to do 2 stitches together. So I'm going to pull up a loop in the first stitch and then pull up a loop in the second stitch. You've got 3 loops on your hook, wrap around and pull through all 3. And I am going to put a stitch marker in that first stitch so I don't miss it, because that decrease there is going to make it a little weird. So now we're going to single crochet all the way to the other end and leave the last 2 unworked, and we'll do another decrease in just a second. All right, I have 2 stitches remaining, so I'm going to do the same decrease, pull up a loop in the next stitch and pull up a loop in the stitch after that. 3 loops on your hook, wrap around and pull through all 3. Chain 1, turn your work. So now we are going to go and do the same thing, decrease, pull up a loop, pull up a loop, pull through all 3, and work all the way across. Just keep doing this until you have 11 stitches left, and then we will finish the lead portion of this pencil. So keep going back and forth, decreasing on both sides every row, and we'll meet back up when you have 11 stitches left. Now 11 stitches left, I'm going to cut my yarn, leaving a tail to weave in my ends. I had chained 1, I'm just going to pull that through, and now I'm going to grab my black, so just a slip knot, and I'm going to do a standing decrease. So I'm going to have my slip knot on my hook, going to go through that first stitch, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, pull up a loop, wrap around and go through all 3. All right, there's my first decrease. I'm going to do the same thing the rest of the way down the end of the tip of this pencil. So you're just going to decrease for this row, so we will have 9 stitches after this decrease on both sides. Chain 1. This one's going to be 7 stitches after the decreases. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and my decrease is going to be 7. Chain 1 and turn. You can see it coming together. This row will have 5 stitches. We've got first decrease, so it was decrease 1, 2, 3, 4, and decrease on the other end, and that's 5. Chain 1 and turn. This will be 3 stitches in total, so we've got our decrease, single crochet 1, and another decrease. All right, chain 1. And now we've got 3 stitches here, so I'm going to decrease on this one, and then I'm going to work into the same stitch here and do another decrease. So the second part of the second half of the decrease for the last stitch, I'm going to start in that one, pull up a loop, and pull up a loop in the next stitch. And then I'm going to chain 1, turn my work, and pull up a loop in the first stitch, pull up a loop in the second stitch, wrap around, pull through all 3, and then just chain 1, cut your yarn, and you're all done. If you had 11, if you had even stitches, you wouldn't have had to do that work into the back into that stitch portion. So if you had even stitches and if you increased or decreased your width of it, then you wouldn't need to do that extra little step. So then there is the end of our pencil. So now we need to do the extra lines on this one. We needed to add this first because when we do the lines for the orange or for the yellow part, we're going to start down a little bit to kind of mimic those points that we have on pencils, like when you sharpen them. So let's go ahead and grab our yellow, and we are just going to do the same thing that we've been doing with our extra little lines, but I'm going to do 3 lines. If you want to do more or less, you can, but I'm going to just fold this in half to just see where that center line is. Or if you want to eyeball it, you can absolutely do that too. So it's about there. So I'm just going to join my yarn like I have. This one you have to start like in the center. So what I'm going to do is go through the space that I want to start in. So I'm going to start a row or 2 down a little bit farther, and I'm going to pull that slip knot up through the project and just grab that from underneath and pull that up like that. All right, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the piece of paper, and we're going to skip over and just do every other row so that we make sure we stay in a nice straight line. Got that, and then I'm just going to skip that row and go up the next stitch. Make sure you keep this nice and loose. So you don't bunch up your project. So every other row, go all the way up the yellow portion, and then we'll stop when we get to the gray and we'll take a look. So I finished that part, and you're just going to do 1 on either side the same exact way up the yellow part, and then we will dress up the little metal piece a tiny bit after that. Now for this gray part, what we're going to do, we're just going to do a few lines here. So just a random amount. It does not matter what you choose, but I am going to, I think, do a little row across where the join is for this one, because I think I would like the way that that would look. I'm going to test that out and see, but you can either do that or skip it. Let's see what that looks like. And just go across where that color was joined up. Yeah, I think I like that. So I think I'm going to do that, and then just spread them out in this space here. So let me do the top and the bottom, and then I think, let's see, so top and bottom, and then I think maybe I'll do 2 more rows about there. So at the join here, 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 and at the join there. And then we will start on joining our pieces together. I'm so excited we get to put our pieces together. So we are going to start with just the front panel and the back panel and the 2 front panels. So that will be our ruler. Got my ends all sewn in. It's a little bit wavy, but once you put the pieces together and you're wearing it, it really just evens itself out. And also, if you want to steam block it or just block it in general, you can also do that. All right, so the way that we're going to lay this out, we are going to put this one, we're going to lay it right side facing your surface. And then we are going to take our pencil and our pencil. So this is going to be like you're looking at the cardigan. So your pencil is going to be on your right hand side and the ruler is going to be on the left hand side. I would like the lines to be on this side of it. So that's going to be where the sleeve goes over here. And this is the neck opening. We're going to end up doing some ribbing around here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to use some stitch markers. If you don't want to do this, you can skip this step, but I find that it helps keep everything in line. So I'm going to do the last stitch and the last stitch for this, and then I'm going to count over my 35 stitches to make sure I'm in the right spot. That is going to be my 35 stitches, and then I'm just going to put one in the middle there. So then I'm also going to do the same thing on this side. Get the end stitch. We are going to just be sewing these together. You can join them any way that you'd like. If you would like to do a slip stitch join, you can do that. But I'm going to do everything in white and just do a whip stitch because I feel like that is going to blend in the most. I'm going to take a length of yarn. You don't want it to be too unmanageable, but it's probably good to do about 3 times the length of the piece that you're sewing on. I'm going to pick up a stitch from the front panel and pick up a stitch from the back panel. So we're going to go through, and once you get a good sized tail that you can sew in, just leave that there. I'm going to hang on to it, and then I'm going to go back through those same stitches one more time. And that's kind of going to just lock that in a little bit so that it doesn't like completely slide out easily when you're sewing. So it's not like totally secure there, but it does help it from sliding out easily. All right, so I'm just going to match stitch for stitch here. And whatever direction you're going, if you're going from this side forward or from this side back, just keep it consistent all the way through. It doesn't matter what direction you do it, just keep it consistent so that your stitches all look the same. So then just keep matching a front stitch for a back stitch. Like that. One front, one back. And then when you get a little ways, I just like to pull this and it straightens it out. And I want to make sure that this join does not bunch up. So I just want to make sure that I'm always leaving a good stretch in there. So go ahead and work all the way down the top of this front panel and the top of this panel. Do that and we'll meet back up to attach the sleeves. Now that I have both of the front panels added on, we're going to add the sleeves. So this side is the side I want to do the crayon on so that I can balance out the colors. Since we've got the pink and everything over here, we're going to do crayon on this side and then we'll do marker on the other side. So we did the edge of the sleeve for the cuff is going to be down here with the 2 rows. So this is the side that we're going to attach to the cardigan. So we're going to use a stitch marker again to just mark the halfway point. So I folded this in half and I'm just going to mark the halfway point. And I'm going to do that on both of these. It's the same thing. Now that we have marked both of our sleeves, I'm going to open up the cardigan. Ooh, look at all these stitch markers. I'm going to open up the cardigan like this, and that stitch marker is just going to line up with that seam. So we have that one is just going to go right there. And then it's going to lay across the sides here. So again, you don't want to stretch this, you just want it to naturally lay wherever it's going to lay. And just go ahead and pin it there at wherever it ends. Do the same thing over here. If you want to count your rows and match it up on the same side or the same length on both sides, you can do that. But I'm going to just eyeball this here. And then when I fold it in half, I'll just make sure it lines up. Okay. Got that folded in half. This is folded in half. Make sure it lines up where I want it to line up. And that looks like it sits in the right spot on both pieces. So then what I'm going to do is, for this one, I'm going to take the purple color, since it is going to be purple all the way through on the sleeve, and this is going to change. The other one, like this, is going to stay white all the way across, so I'm going to be consistent with this one when I join on the other side, and join that one with the white like I've done all the other seams. So let's go ahead and seam this up exactly the same way that we did the top panels. So we're just going to go ahead and join those together. You're going to work all the way across and then do that with your marker side as well. And then we'll meet back up when we are ready to seam up the underarms and the sides. How you're going to seam up the sides of this cardigan, you are going to seam up exactly the same way that you've been doing, but now you can see that it is folded back the way that you would actually wear it. So this is the front side, the ruler side, you've got your back, and your crayon sleeve is folded over. So then you're going to take your yarn again. For this one, we're going to use the same color for the crayon and just seam up the same way that we've been doing and work from the outside and just pick up the stitch on one on each side, go all the way to the underarm. So go through here, attach this, and then you will switch to your white, and then you will seam up the side all the way down the side panel. So then your underarm and your side of your cardigan will all be attached. Do that on both sides, and then we will come back for the cuffs and how we're going to build the cuffs of the cardigan. Now for the cuff of our sleeve, we are actually going to work this separately and then sew it on. So you can choose whatever width that you want for your cuff. I need at least 2 inches here to be the length that I need for my arm measurement, but you might want to do a little bit longer because this is representing, you know, the end of the crayon, so the part that you draw with. So however long you want that to be is how long your cuff, you can make your cuff. So I'm going to do a 9 single crochet cuff. So I'm going to chain 10. Okay, and I'm going to skip the first chain and work into the second one. We'll have 9 at the end of this row. All right, so 9 singles there. And then we're going to chain 1, turn our work, and we're working in the back loop only of these single crochets. and work all the way across till you get to your last stitch. And in that one we are going to work into both loops just because I feel like it gives a little bit more of a secure edge for the cuff. And we're going to do that on both ends that we end on. So not our starting single crochet, but our ending single crochet of each row. All right, chain 1 and turn, and you're going to do the same thing, working in the back loop only of every stitch until you get to your last one. And if you don't want to do that, you don't need to. All right, last stitch, I'm going to work in both loops. Okay, and you're just going to repeat that back and forth until you reach the measurement that reaches around your wrist comfortably. Whatever measurement you like, whatever feels good on your wrist, you can keep it loose, you can do it tight. Whatever is the most comfortable for you, do your measurement like that. And then we'll meet back up and I'll show you how we're going to attach the cuff to the sleeve. I have finished with 30 rows and that fits my wrist comfortably and a nice amount of room. It's not snug, but you can make it fit however you'd like. Now we are going to leave a good size tail because we are going to be seaming up our cuff together and then also attaching it to the cardigan with the same piece of yarn. So just keep that in mind when you're cutting the length. So I have chained 1 here and I'm just going to pull that all the way through. And we're just going to put these 2 sides together and we're just going to do the whip stitch to attach these, the beginning and the end together. So same thing that we've been doing for all the other seaming up, stitch for stitch, and just doing the whip stitch. That is all set. We are going to attach that to our cardigan. So this is another place that having stitch markers will really help. And we are just going to place the cuff with the thread side up. We're going to place that inside of the sleeve like that. So attaching with a stitch marker where our sewing thread is. We'll weave in those other ends later, but put our stitch marker there. And then you are going to look into the sleeve like this. So I want it to be the same amount of space on either side. And I'm just going to pin that right across from where my starting point is. And then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. So wherever this halfway mark is here, just attach that there. And then on this other side, same thing. Wherever that fold is, I'm going to grab that, and then up here, grab that. And then you know that those stitches all need to fit within that section. So you can give this a little bit of a stretch while you're sewing. Let's get that started. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I am just going to give this a little stretch while I'm working just to make sure that those pieces line up, those little sections. And just doing the same exact thing that we've been doing. Just doing a whip stitch. And then we are just going to work across that section. I stretch it out a tiny bit just so that I know where my stitches need to land. And I'll show you what it looks like when we reach the stitch marker. All right, so then we're going to do the same thing between that space and the next stitch marker. And then just do that all the way around the cuff, and we'll meet back to take a look and talk about our next step. All right, here is the end result of the cuff on the sleeve. And let me just try it on for you real quick. So that is the crayon portion of the sleeve that we have. So that is how it ended up fitting around my wrist. So if you want it smaller, you can feel free to do it a little bit smaller, because once you attach it to the sleeve, it does open it up just a tiny bit. But you have that little tapered look of the crayon right there. All right, so you're going to do the exact same thing on the other sleeve, but on this one, you are going to do the cuff in green. But everything else is the same, and you're just going to attach it the exact same way with the extra length of yarn from the cuff, and then you're just going to sew it on the same way. So once you are all done with both of your cuffs, come back and we are going to start on the ribbing around the collar and around the bottom of the cardigan. Now we're going to do a setup for our ribbing. So we're going to go all the way around this neck portion, and we're going to do a setup row. So we are going to single crochet up this side, all in the brown, just working a single crochet in each of the end of each one of the rows, and then down the pencil side as well. I'm going to match the color of the sides. So with this side, I just started with a standing single crochet and then ended with a slip stitch on the last stitch, just to give that transition a nice turn there. And then on the pencil side, we're going to do the same thing and change colors for each section here. And doing the same thing, working one single crochet per end of row. Now, if you don't want to do this, you don't need to. It just gives it a really nice crisp edging for your ribbing when we attach it. So I'm going to show you how to do the color changes, starting on the pink and going down into the gray and then into the pencil. Then we are also going to be doing color changes for the end of the pencil as well. So we'll follow the tan section, the black section, and then the tan again on the other side. On the very back side, you don't need to do a setup row on that or the bottom of any of the panels, because we already have those stitches available to work into, and they're nice and crisp already. So we don't need to do it for the top and bottom, just these opening edges of the cardigan. So I'm going to show you the pencil section. We're going to start with the pink, and I'm just going to attach the yarn on the first pink row, on the edge of the first pink row over here. So we're just going to do a little slip stitch here. Pull your yarn through the project and then through the loop on your hook. Then it's a nice smooth transition between the pink and the white. And then just one single crochet per end of row that we have on this side, all the way down on both opening sides of the cardigan. So I'm going to work down the pink here, and then I will show you what we're going to do for the gray section and how we're going to switch colors. Now once we get to the gray, we are going to not finish the last stitch of the pink, and we are going to take a loop of our gray and pull that loop through the 2 remaining loops on our hook. Then that completes the stitch. And then we just start working directly into the gray, the same way that we did the pink, just 1 single crochet per row that we made of the gray. You'll have to weave in your ends, and you want to make sure that these loops here, you keep them nice and snug so that they don't get all spaced out, because the yarn is still loose on the back there. You have to weave in your ends later on, but just make sure that they don't pull larger loops than a typical single crochet, the top of a single crochet stitch. So just go ahead and finish your gray section here, and then we're going to do the same thing with a color change on the yellow. Okay, once we get to the end of the gray, you're going to leave those 2 loops on your hook, cut your yarn, and then you're going to finish the stitch with that loop of yellow. So the same way we did the gray, just pull that loop through the 2 gray loops on your hook. That finishes that single crochet. Just make sure that those ends are nice and snug, and then continue working like usual. Check those ends every once in a while. Just work down your yellow until you get to the tip of the pencil. Now we're ready to change to the tan color. So it's just the same thing. We're going to finish off our stitch with the tan and move across these stitches, just doing your best to get 1 stitch per end of row, even though it's at an angle. It doesn't need to be perfect, just aim for 1 stitch per end of row. And then just work this all the way down to the black section, and we will change colors again for the black, and then I'll show you how we're going to work around the tip of the pencil lid. We're going to change colors for our black. Just pull that through to finish off the tan stitch, and then we're going to work down the pencil lid. Same thing, 1 stitch for each row. And then when we get to the very end of the stitch, or the very end of the tip of the pencil, we're just going to do 3 singles into that end, just to make that little turn. Continue working this same way up the lead of the pencil, and then we are going to color change for the tan section, and then color change for the yellow section as well, just following the same thing that we've done on the other side. So continue doing that. We'll meet back up for starting the ribbing. Now we're ready to start our ribbing. So we are going to start on the last section that you just finished of the pencil. So that little yellow part that hangs past the back side of the cardigan, we're going to start right there. That is going to be where we do our border, or the ribbing on the bottom of the cardigan. So we're going to attach our yarn with a standing single crochet at the far right side of the yellow, and we are going to work in the back loop only of this yellow, the standing single crochet, and work a single crochet in the back loop only all the way across this yellow section. You will end with 9 single crochets. So now we are going to be attaching the ribbing to the bottom part of the cardigan, and we are going to attach along this side. We're going to work in the back loop only. So slip stitch into 2 stitches here. I tied in my ends on this corner, so it was a little bit tough to get my hook through here. So slip stitch 1 stitch, slip stitch into the 2nd stitch, and then we're going to turn our work and work back the other direction for the ribbing. So we're going to be working in the back loop only for this as well. The whole black ribbing section is going to be worked back loop only. So single crochet, back loop only. So skipping those 2 slip stitches we made to connect to the back of the cardigan, and just do 9 single crochets in the back loop only across this black section. And then at the end, I like to go in under both loops instead of just the back loop, and then chain 1 and turn, just like we did the cuffs. And then single crochet, back loop only all the way back to the cardigan side. And on the last stitch here, we are not going to go under both loops just because we are connecting that to the edge of the cardigan, so we don't need to secure it like we do the end. So back loop only of that last stitch. We're going to slip stitch into 2 stitches on the back of the cardigan. There's 1 slip stitch, there's 2, and then we're going to turn our work and work back the other direction, and this is going to be the same thing that we're doing for the ribbing all the way across the bottom. So back loop only, single crochet across here, and then the last stitch we are going to go under both loops just to secure that edge a little bit more. If you want to just do the back loop of that stitch, you can feel free to do that. So we're going to work all the way down to the end of the ruler, that corner right there, work all the way across, and then I'll show you the next step for the button band. All right, we've worked all the way around, and just to show a little example of why I say work in the back loop only on the cardigan piece, you get this really nice line right here. So it has a very nice edge for your trim. So when you end your row, you want to be, or when you end your ribbing for the bottom of the cardigan, you want to be on this side. So you want to be on the bottom edge, because then we're going to continue the ribbing up this direction. Now the first thing that you want to do before you start the ribbing here, I'm going to pull my hook out for a second and lay this down for us to look at real quick, because we need to figure out where we want our buttons. So when you're placing your buttons, try on your cardigan and see where you want your bottom button, which for me would be, I'm probably going to put it somewhere around here in the ribbing. So I'm going to put a stitch marker there. And then for your top button, you want to make sure it lines up with the largest part of your bust. So I am going to put my stitch marker about here, and mark this while you're wearing it. I'm going to go back and just double check that this is the right location for me, but I'm going to just share this information with you now, and then you can put this on and see where the largest part of your bust is and put your button there. You don't want the largest part of your bust in a gap between buttons, because if it's pulling, then you're causing a gap at your bust line. So just make sure that you are putting your button at the bust line, not above or below. Now, if you want it to start lower, if you want your buttons to start lower and you only want to do like 3 buttons, 2 or 3 buttons at the bottom of the cardigan, then do it that way. So if you're going to have buttons as far up as your bust, you just want to make sure that your first button starts there, unless you want them to be lower in the cardigan. So now I had envisioned 5 buttons. So I'm not entirely sure where exactly I want them to land. I may do 4, but what you would do is, let's just say we're doing 4 buttons. I'm just going to space these other markers evenly through here. So like I said, I still need to try this on to make sure that the placement is correct for me. But as an example, you would place your bottom button. I'm going to place it about here in my ribbing. If you want to go center, you can, but I feel like this is a good place for me. When I try it on, I'll know a little bit better as well. So you want to space them evenly. I think that these are a little bit off here, but you get the basic idea. So place them evenly between your top button and your bottom button with how many buttons you want to place in there. So I'm going to go check and see what my where I want my placement, and I will be right back and we'll start doing our ribbing for this section here. All right, so I tried it on, and where I had marked it was the proper spot for the widest part of my bust, but when I tried it on, I really like the idea of just having 3 buttons on the lower portion. So I stuck with this one being the top, and then just evenly disperse the middle button. Okay, so I have 10.5 inches there, so I'm pretty good at that section right there. So I'm just going to leave everything where it is. And now we're going to work up this side and around the neck. Now, before we start the button band section, I do want to mention around this section of the collar, I tend to end up having a collar that sits up funny. Now, if you don't have this problem, you can disregard these instructions, but right here in this corner space, I'm going to do 2 or 3 sections of 3 slip stitches when I'm joining my ribbing. So instead of working back and forth, slip stitch 2, work back, work, turn, work back, connect with 2 slip stitches, and do that. I'm going to do that with 3 stitches, I think 2 or 3 times between here. You just have to play with it. If you end up having that cone type shape around your collar when you wear it and it cones up around your neck instead of laying flat, that is something that I've found does seem to help quite a bit. And if you're finding that even that doesn't bring it down enough, you could do a few more up in this section here. So just work with whatever fits you best, but that is what I have found works best for the way that cardigans seem to fit me. So let's work our button band, and I'll show you how we're going to make a space for our buttons. I'm sorry for that background sound in that last clip. I had the fan going and I forgot to turn it off. But okay, so we are going to do the exact same thing, just back and forth. We're going to do the same width. If you want to do it wider or thinner, you can feel free to do whatever you like. I just wanted a really nice thick border because this does represent our blackboard section of our classroom cardigan. So to start off with our ribbing going up for the button band, we are going to chain 10. And then you're going to skip that first chain and work a single crochet in the second chain from the hook and in the rest of the chain, so you should have a total of 9 single crochets when you get back to your cardigan. Okay, so we have 9 there. Now we're going to do our 2 slip stitches into the ribbing that we already created. So we're going to back loop only on all of these again, so we have that nice edge. Slipping 1 and slipping 2, turning our work and skipping those 2 slip stitches, working our single crochet into each stitch. So you're just going to go back and forth and do the same thing that we've been doing for the whole bottom ribbing of the cardigan. And when you get to your stitch marker, I'm going to show you how we'll make a space for our button. So I am to my stitch marker. So what I'm going to do, so on my return pass, I'm going to connect to my 2 slip stitches. I have 1 free slip stitch or 1 free stitch open to slip stitch in, and then I have 1 that has the stitch marker. That means that return row needs to have a space for the button. So I'm going to take that stitch marker out, and then I'm going to slip stitch there, turn my work, and I am going to put my buttonhole in the very center of this ribbing. So I'm going to return the same way I normally do. I have 9 stitches, so I'm going to put my buttonhole at stitch number 5. So I'm going to do the same thing that I've been doing, but only go 4 stitches. And then I'm going to create my buttonhole. So if you have a larger button than I do, I have these little, they're called horn toggles. Sometimes you use them on the bottom of like a sweatshirt or something where you have a drawstring and one of those little clasps that hold the drawstring together. But I thought that this looked just perfect for a little piece of chalk. So because this is our blackboard part of our cardigan, I thought that this would be a great addition for this section and have it look like a little piece of chalk. So since this is so thin, I only need to leave 1 chain space or a 1 stitch space for this button to go through. Now you could use regular circle buttons. A white circle button would be adorable if you wanted to do something like that. But I'm going with these buttons. I do have my Amazon affiliate link in the description for these buttons if you are interested in purchasing them. They come, I think, in a 15 pack or something like that. But that is in the description if you're interested in these buttons. Otherwise, I would recommend just using a regular old white button. So if your buttons are small like mine, you would only do a 1 stitch space like I'm going to show you. Otherwise, you could leave 1 or 2 spaces open and just center it somewhere in the middle of your ribbing. All right, so we have worked our regular 4 stitches. I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to skip a stitch and then work the rest of my row exactly the same as I have been. Now on the return row, I used to do it a different way, but for this one I want to show you something a little bit different because it makes the stitch or the buttonhole a little bit easier to find, especially because it's only 1 stitch. So it's right there. Typically I would just work all the way across here just like normal and just work back loop only and back loop only of that chain. But I'm going to actually work into that space on my return row. So we're going to go see, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to work right into that space. And that's going to open up that buttonhole a little bit more, so it's easier to find when I'm trying to button and unbutton this cardigan. All right, so I have another 4, 2, 3, and if I can find my 4th stitch, all right, 4, and then attach to the cardigan just like normal. And you're going to do the same thing all the way up until your next stitch marker. Now, if your stitch marker ends up on a return row, you could just either move it up 1, or you could go down 1, or you could do the opposite and just leave that space on the way here. The only difference is you're going to, like, this part right here is just going to look a little bit different, but it really is not that big of a deal if you just want to do it exactly this where it's located on and where it lands either on a row this way or this way. But all you're going to do is just skip that stitch in the center to leave that hole for your button. Everything else is exactly the same. Now, I did forget to mention, if you are making this, the button placement is meant for a women's cardigan. If you are making this for a man, you are going to put the button holes on the other side. So on the pencil side, you're going to put the button holes on your way down this way. So the buttons would go on this side, buttonholes would go on this side for a men's cardigan. So if you have a male teacher and you want to do that for him, that's how you would put the buttons for him. But you're going to start on this side no matter who it's for. So men and women, you're going to start on this side of the card and work your way up and down. And remember, we're working in the back loop only of these stitches that we created on the edge here to make it nice and crisp, give a really pretty line in the front here. And then remember what we talked about with going into doing the 3 slip stitches and then going back and doing your ribbing that way, connecting with 3 instead of 2, just as a help to pull that collar in a little bit. So go ahead and work all the way around this side. There's nothing different. You're just going to keep working all the way down, and we're going to work all the way down to the yellow, the end of the yellow on our cardigan here. So on this side, we're just going to end at the yellow. And then I will come back after that's all done. I'll come back and we will place our buttons and we'll sew on our buttons. All right, now we are ready to add our buttons. So I made 3 buttonholes on my cardigan. However many you did, that's how many buttons you're going to need. So I did 3. So I have 3 of those little toggles. And I'm going to use white thread to tie these on so that they match with the button. Typically, I would try to match something with the background color to sew it on, but because white is going to be visible on the actual button, I want to use something that's going to blend in. So this is the side I did my buttonholes. I have this one here, I've got one here, and I have one right there. So I'm going to be putting my buttons on the opposite side. So you can do this however you want. I'm going to just randomly do different directions for them because I think it would be really cute because it's just a piece of chalk. I'm just going to embrace it being different directions. I lined up the bottom of the cardigan and now I'm just going to mark across from it. So the center of wherever I want it to land. I'm going to do that on for all the buttons. There. And if you happen to put a button in the wrong place or you don't like the placement, you can always untie it or cut it off and re-sew it back on. It's the awesome part about buttons. So all I'm going to do is place this where my stitch marker is in whatever direction I want it to land, and then just sew it on. I'm going to start from the back and just come up through the back, leaving a tail so that you can tie that. We're not going to weave in our ends this time just because we don't have anything to weave in with the same color. So I like to go around the buttonholes about 2 or 3 times. With the size of hole that these come with, I can probably go through about 3 times, and that would work pretty well. All right, so that's what that one looks like. On the back side, because I am not going to sew in my ends and it's just a button, I am going to tie several knots and just alternate the way that I'm tying. So just an overhand knot over here, and just do that several times. And then you can cut your yarn just like that. And then your button is all set to use. And it looks like that. Super cute. So just end up doing the rest of your buttons, and then we're going to add a finishing touch to the back of the cardigan. And that one is also optional if you don't want to add it. After your buttons, you are completely done. So I am going to be back in just a moment with the back of the cardigan so we can add our little final touch. What my plan is to do an A+ on the back with a circle around it. Now this is just freehand. There's no technical way to do it, but I'm going to map out where I want my A to land. So I will probably just put it just to the right of where the neck is so that you can see it well, because this kind of drapes over. I didn't want to place it on here before I could try it on, so I knew where the placement was going to be. So I'm just going to say, let's start the top of the A here. Let's do let's see, how big do we want it? Let's do about here. Since this is the name of the cardigan, I don't mind making it bigger than I normally would for something like this, because it's supposed to stand out. Let's see. Okay, and then we'll put the plus over here with a big circle around it. So let's see how the A goes, and then we'll add the plus over on the side. We're going to do the same thing that we did with the line on the side. We're just going in a different direction. So it's not going to be perfect, since we're obviously not going in, straight up the cardigan. We're kind of going at an angle. So we're just going to see what works. I'm going to put my red underneath here. I think I'm going to go down a tiny bit farther. Okay. And then my goal is to meet up with that other stitch marker. So the same thing that we've been doing with all of our extra details, just doing our slip stitches and working up. And this is supposed to be like handwriting type of thing, so it's okay if it's a little bit crooked. Handwriting is not exact, not always perfect. So just pick the spaces that seem to give you the best direction. And that's how we're gonna work up our A+. So that one ended up actually being pretty straight, but we're gonna go down at an angle for this one. And remember to keep your stitches loose so that you're not restraining the stretch of the back panel, because you don't want it to start getting all puckery up here. So just remember to keep your slip stitches loose. And I'm gonna work my way down and then do a little crossover, and then I'll probably bring my yarn over to here and do the T, and just really do whatever seems to fit the best if you're going to add this. And then we're just gonna do a circle around. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I'm gonna just freehand all the way around. If you wanna do markers the way that we did with this and mark where you want to go, I'm just gonna do it randomly and do kind of like a swirl circle. And so it's not like a perfect circle. So I'll be back when that's done and show you what that looks like. Okay, so we have the A+ on the back. You could leave it without the circle on it if you want. You could do just the A+. You could stitch this with just your yarn needle if you want. So this is what we have going on as far as the A+ cardigan goes. Let's take a look at it on so that we can see the final result of this A+ cardigan.